All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining early this morning. A nice 8 a.m. start time, so appreciate it. My name is Lindsay Jones. I am the Senior Program Administrator for WIFA. So WIFA, if you haven't worked with us before, we are the State Revolving Fund Administrator for Arizona. So we get funding from the EPA and our revolving loan funds to then loan out to give financing for water and wastewater projects. So let's go in here. So we have several different programs, and I'll get into some details about the different financial programs that we offer, but our main ones are the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. The Clean Water SRF is to do loans and technical assistance to publicly owned treatment works and for wastewater infrastructure projects. And then we have the Drinking Water SRF for loans and TA to the public water systems. We also have the Water Supply Development Fund. I'll discuss it more at the end of the presentation, but it is a fund that's existed under WIFA statute for quite some time. And just recently, we've had some major changes to that program and some actual funding added into the fund so that we can now do something with it. A little bit about WIFA's numbers. So we have provided over $2 billion in loans since 1989. Currently, we have over 290 active loans, and we've given out over $100 million in loan forgiveness since 2009. We've worked with with borrowers throughout all of Arizona's counties and have over 200 borrowers that we have worked with in Arizona. For who is eligible for WIFA funding, it is pretty broad, so we can work with cities, towns, tribal entities, special districts, as long as they own the public water system, own the publicly owned wastewater treatment facility, or if they are managing stormwater. It's likely going to be an eligible borrower. We also work with the private drinking water companies. Historically, it was just companies regulated by the Arizona Corporation Commission, but a policy change recently now allows us to work with non-ACC regulated drinking water companies as long as they are resolving an identified deficiency. As far as what is eligible under the SRF program, it's really anything related to water or wastewater or stormwater. It's pretty all-inclusive. It could include reclaimed water projects, reuse projects, any sort of watershed protection or restoration projects. It's fairly broad as long as it's linked to the drinking water or wastewater system in some way. And then we can do all phases of the project, from planning and design through construction. And we can also fund acquisitions and water right purchases and things like that. Here are just some pictures of some typical types of projects which we have funded. So, water and sewer pipes, booster pumps, treatment systems, reclaimed water projects, storage tanks, wells, meters, any sort of upgrades to treatment facilities. We can also add on alternative energy like the solar project you see in the top right, as long as it's being added on to the treatment facility. It's eligible. Additionally, there's a bunch of other eligibilities that you might not think of for financing through WIFA, but it is eligible. So stormwater management, putting in low impact development infrastructure, any sort of stormwater, flood control. We could also do like forest restoration, forest thinning projects, riparian improvement projects. And then the big one is recharge and reuse, which we've seen a lot of increased interest in the past several years here. So Next, I will just get into some of the incentives that WIFA can offer and the reasons why communities want to work with WIFA. So we offer, it's a discounted below market interest rate on all of our loans. We have flexible loan terms of up to 30 years. We can't go beyond the useful life of whatever we are financing. But typically for the big water and wastewater infrastructure projects, they have a very long useful life. So going up to 30 years is typically not a problem. We offer loan forgiveness or forgivable principal, which is grant-like funding, money that does not need to be repaid. And we have different procedures on how it's allocated per project, and I will get into some of the details on that. We also offer a lot of different types of technical assistance that can it's initiated with the initial application process, but it can be either, direct technical assistance from WIFA staff. We can help with getting applications filled out, submitted, answering your questions along the way. And we can also contract out for some help, technical assistance with planning and design costs we can help to pay for, and then compliance with the federal requirements. So these are the dollar amounts for what we have for technical assistance. They've actually gone up this past year because of the increase in federal funding that we're getting. So I'll discuss that more. But basically, we can pay up to $50,000 per project to help pay for the design or to pay for compliance with federal requirements, and then up to $20,000 for complying with the Davis-Bacon Act. So this next, or maybe two slides, I'll have a kind of overview on all the different TA that we can offer. But, really the idea behind our technical assistance is we want to make navigating the process easier. We want to reduce the burden of any of the federal requirements on our borrowers as much as possible. So that's kind of how we have targeted our TA offerings. We also offer compliance assistance to all of our borrowers. So we have a contract packet that includes all of WIFA's requirements that anyone who is bidding or signing a contract with you all would need to know as far as what they need to comply with and how they need to comply. That way it makes your contracting and your procurement process a little bit simpler. As long as you're including our contract packet, it should have all the information they need about Davis-Bacon, about American Iron and Steel requirements, and all the various forms that go with those requirements. So this is the overview of the different technical assistance we can offer. Like I said, we can pay for project design. That's only going to be for small communities or disadvantaged communities. We can also pay to help, meet the federal requirements. So that would be things like doing the environmental assessment and review. We have the cost and effectiveness analysis and fiscal sustainability plan. Those are requirements for our clean water loans, but we can help, pay a consultant to do those plans for you, do the environmental assessment, so that, we are contracting directly with someone to do it. You're hopefully, the burden of doing that stuff is eased from you a little bit. So, and then the final TA that we can offer is assistance from the Councils of Governments, or COGS. Basically, they are Davis-Bacon experts in your area that we will contract with. They will come out and help do Davis-Bacon payroll reviews. They will help to interview the construction workers on the site, help to get any issues resolved, make sure people are being paid the correct Davis-Bacon wages, all of that. So I think that's been super helpful for our borrowers, and that one is only available to the small communities, disadvantaged communities, or the privately owned drinking water companies. We have few different options as far as when you want to come and apply for funding. So you can, apply for a single project, for example, where you just are putting in a new storage tank, one project application, or you could apply with your whole CIP and do a capital improvement plan financing option, where it's still one application. You submit the entire CIP with it. Um, and then we will go through, we will do the environmental reviews necessary, kind of review all the projects, get them approved for financing, and then it gives you a lot of flexibility moving forward because you can kind of pick and choose what projects out of your CIP you want to prioritize. If one gets delayed, you can move forward with another project that's been approved for loan funds. So it really makes it a streamlined approach so that you're not having to apply for a new loan or request a scope change anytime you have your priorities shift on what projects need to get done next. Some streamlined projects. So these are ones that, would be exempt from the American Iron and Steel compliance, typically don't have a lot of environmental review process going on. So it'd be things like installing meters or generators, adding pumps, or doing non-point source projects. So these could be really good options for getting WIFA funding, because they're going to be a little bit more streamlined as far as the AIS compliance. Another option for funding that we have is our design loans. So these are loans just for the design phase of the project. It's going to be a 3-year loan term with interest-only payments on what is drawn for the 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, it's basically a large principal payment is due. But what we typically see happen is they're rolled into the longer term construction loans, either with WIFA or with another funding entity. So it's a really great way to get, the design phase of it done, very low cost option. It's set at a flat 1% interest rate for all the communities. So again, very low cost option to get started on your projects. All right, now to everyone's favorite topic, the forgivable principles. So our loan forgiveness, it works two different ways. On the clean water side, which is again for wastewater and stormwater projects, we can provide up to 50% of a loan as forgivable principal if it is for a disadvantaged community. Alternatively, we could offer up to 20% of the loan as forgivable principal if it is a green project. So that's any water or energy efficiency projects. That could include reclaimed and reuse projects. Or we could also do up to 20% if it is a project that's mitigating stormwater. So we always say up to amounts though, because it's obviously going to depend on the total loan size and how much we have available and what priorities we have with the different projects that are coming through. I put on there the amounts from previous funding cycles that we had available. This past year with the bipartisan infrastructure law, those amounts have gone up quite significantly. So it's pretty exciting. We'll have a lot more loan forgiveness. We'll be able to start giving out for different projects. And again, I'll get into some of the details on that in a few slides. On the drinking water side, it does work a little bit differently. It's basically 3 tiers that we consider for how much loan forgiveness we can offer. The first tier would be for disadvantaged communities who are also addressing a public health threat. The second tier is disadvantaged or addressing a health threat. And then the third tier is for all infrastructure projects, slightly less generous for them, but all infrastructure projects, regardless of if it's for a disadvantaged community or resolving a public health threat, are going to be eligible for some level of forgivable principal. And I think, the next slide So this would be the first tier and how it breaks down. I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but I wanted to include these slides so that you'd have them for reference in your handout materials. But the exciting one for this first tier is really the first line there. So if your project cost is $250,000 or less, you're serving a disadvantaged community, and it's addressing a public health threat, like you're putting in, small arsenic treatment um, facility or doing something like that, resolving a violation, basically, you can get up to 100% of the loan forgiven. So you could get $250,000 just completely forgiven. Nothing's being repaid. There's no interest. There's no, fees or anything assessed to it. So it's pretty exciting. And then as the loan size goes up, the percentage goes down, but still is pretty generous for this first tier. This is the second tier, so this is disadvantaged or addressing a public health threat. So you can see for the smaller projects, 250,000 or less, you could get up to 85% forgiven, and then it goes down from there. And then the third tier, like I said, is for all infrastructure projects, not quite as generous as the first two tiers. So now it's, up to 25% of the loan for the small loans. Once we get into the bigger loan sizes, it's up to 8%. And again, it's always going to be based on what is available and the other projects that we have in our pipeline. Um, so one question that we always get is, how do we define a disadvantaged community? It is a strange thing because for us, we get excited when we can say, hey, we're going to qualify you as disadvantaged because, like you just saw, that means you're going to be eligible for more loan forgiveness. So we qualify someone as disadvantaged based on a few different factors. You're automatically going to be eligible if you're in a colonia, if your system is serving a colonia and that's designated by a federal agency. These are areas close to the Arizona-Mexico border. They're, have a long history of being underserved in water and wastewater services. They typically have a lower median household income, so those automatically qualify. Additionally, we changed our policy actually just recently, so that now if a community has a median household income of 90% or lower than the state's current MHI, then they're automatically qualifying as disadvantaged. So it makes it a little more easy to understand right off the bat if you are automatically qualifying. Even if your MHI is above that 90% cutoff, the community could still qualify as disadvantaged, but that's when we would look at other criteria like the rates that the users are being charged and the existing level of debt. If there's high rates, high level of debt, plus a fairly low MHI, we put that all into a calculation and see if it's going to get enough points to qualify as disadvantaged. All right, so now on to the really exciting stuff. The lots of changes coming to WIFA. First, back in November of 2021, we had President Biden sign the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill as we are calling it. You may also hear it referred to as the IIJA, or Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. The same thing, basically just a huge investment in all sorts of infrastructure, but that's going to be including water and wastewater, and really increasing the level of funding that the state revolving funds throughout the country will be getting. So on this slide is just some of the goals of the bill funds. So it is funding that is going through EPA to the state revolving funds, kind of in our normal process, but with some specific uses of the funds that will be flowing through us. So one of the big goals for the bill funds is to target the resources to disadvantaged communities. We want to make sure that these communities have the funds available, have the incentives available, like the loan forgiveness. So that's been a big push to provide more loan forgiveness for the disadvantaged communities to get these projects done. The second big goal is to make rapid progress on lead-free water for all. So we have specific funds for the lead service line inventory and replacement projects. Definitely, if you have any of those types of projects, we would love to hear from you because we have a lot of funding for it, which I'll show on the next slide, the dollar amounts. And then the final really big goal for the bill funds coming through WIFA is to tackle those forever chemicals. So we are, are looking for the projects that are going to be treating for really any emerging contaminants of concern, but the bill specifically calls out PFAS, which we have been finding more and more of now throughout the state. So we have funding specific that can go towards PFAS treatment, but also, like I said, other emerging contaminants of concern could be included as well. So these are the numbers. So the bill funds it's 5 years of funding. And this is just for this first year of funding. So we have our base grants that we get every year from the EPA. Those will continue on indefinitely. But then the supplemental grants are what have been authorized through the bill funds. So we have on the drinking water side, we'll be getting about 32 million from the supplemental grant. 49% of that has to go out as loan forgiveness just to disadvantaged communities. We have the emerging contaminants supplemental fund, which is a little over 13 million, and that will be given out as 100% loan forgiveness. The one caveat with that is obviously if we have a project come to us for a $40 million PFAS treatment plant, we can't give them 100% loan forgiveness. We can give 100% of that 13.5 million out as loan forgiveness. So it's one important distinction there that people get mixed up on. And then the really big fund is the lead service line fund. So you can see this year we'll be getting just over $50 million for the lead service line specific projects, and 49% of that will be given out as loan forgiveness, again, just to disadvantaged communities. This could be projects to actually replace lead service lines. But it could also, and what we're anticipating, at least for especially this first year or two of funding, is that we'll be using a lot of these funds for lead service line inventories, which, if you haven't heard, if you're a public water system, you have to do lead service line inventories because of the lead and copper rule revisions. So we definitely have funding available to help pay for it, and quite a bit of loan forgiveness that we can give out to help get these projects funded and moving forward. On the clean water side, so we have, again, the base grant that we get every year, a supplemental grant, which is not quite as big as on our drinking water side, but will be about 12 million. And again, about half of that is going out for loan forgiveness to disadvantaged communities or projects doing a green project. And then the emerging contaminant fund, which is fairly small. It's on the clean water side, so it would be adding on like PFAS treatment to a wastewater facility, for example. And we're anticipating this first year of funding is about 600,000. Future years will be a little over $1 million. So, not quite as much money as on the drinking water side, but still something, and that will go out as 100% loan forgiveness from that fund. So that was the big news on the federal side. Then we also have had a lot of changes coming through on our state funding options. So we have the Arizona Senate Bill 1740, which just passed recently, several months ago, and we're working through all the changes that it created. But basically, this is the big kind of headline news bill that you may have seen, where the Governor Ducey was initially thinking of creating a new state agency called the Arizona Water Authority. Instead, they decided to basically expand WIFA's responsibilities and funding sources to take on what they were considering for this new water authority, gave us more funding options and kind of the different projects that we'll be doing with it. I'll get into in a second here. So basically, under SB 1740, there's three different programs that were authorized. The Water Supply Development Fund, like I said, has existed for quite some time under WIFA statute. It was established back in 2007 and was meant to help rural parts of Arizona meet their water supply needs, basically. So last year we did receive some funds, but this year SB 1740 made some changes to it and then also added more funds to it. So I'll have a few slides on the Water Supply Development Fund. The other big one, this was really the big headline piece, was the Long-Term Water Augmentation Fund. So this was originally established under Arizona Department of Water Resources, with the main purpose of it to be financing projects that are importing water from outside of Arizona. So this is the $1 billion, project that, possibly will be a desalinization plant down in Mexico trying to bring water, or, there's some other ideas. It's not so much meant for the different communities in Arizona to be applying for this fund, but we will be instead kind of taking charge on getting these projects done and hopefully getting some water imported into Arizona. And then the final program, the SB 1740, kind of, this one was created actually by SB 1740 by a floor amendment to it. So it came in kind of at the last minute, but it's the Water Conservation Grant Fund. And that's expected to be about $200 million of ARPA funds that will be going into this conservation grant fund, which we can do all sorts of really cool projects with. But just a few more details about the Water Supply Development Fund. So we almost had it operational in 2012, but then the money was kind of swept out of it. We did have $46 million put into it in the previous budget cycle, and we were kind of getting it ramped up to get going on accepting applications. And then we were told, maybe hold off a little bit. They wanted to make some other changes to what is eligible and the amounts and everything. So we are now working through all the changes that Senate Bill 1740 made. Basically, it clarified who is eligible for this funding. Again, it's meant for rural parts of Arizona. So they have limited it to the water providers, cities, towns, districts, public entities that are located outside of the active management areas, or AMAs, of Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal County. So you have to be outside of the big AMAs in the metro areas to be eligible for these funds. The increase the amount that we could do per project for a loan to $3 million, and then per project as a grant is $2 million. And then they also changed some of the project, how we're going to prioritize projects. So we're working through getting that updated. And they made it clear that debt authorization is not going to require voter approval if you're just pledging revenue. So those were some of the big changes that SB 1740 made to the Water Supply Development Fund. As far as what is eligible, it's, again, anything really related to water supply development. That could include purchasing water rights, or it could include planning, design, and constructing, water lines, storage tanks, doing any sort of reclamation or reuse projects, any replenishment of groundwater, any stormwater recharge projects are going to be eligible. And additionally, that the very last bullet point they added on with SB 1740. So any conservation projects that are going to be, improving the water supply is also going to be eligible under this fund. So again, long-term water augmentation fund, that was kind of the big headline piece where we are looking at $1 billion over the next 3 years to try to fund a project that's going to be importing water from outside of Arizona. So I'm not going to get into more details on that. We are working through getting that up and going. But again, I don't think it'll be impacting our local water systems as far as a funding option for you all to take advantage of, at least right away. The final one was the Water Conservation Grant Fund, which again, it'll be about $200 million of ARPA funds going for education and research programs. And then projects like rainwater harvesting, efficiency upgrades, doing turf removal or xeriscaping, any sort of groundwater recharge, landscape, watershed protection, green, low impact development kind of stuff. All will be eligible for it. Who is eligible is going to be the cities, towns, counties, districts, commissions, authorities, pretty much any public entity. And then they also put in their non-governmental conservation organizations, basically. So pretty all-inclusive. They put the max that we could give out for a conservation program is $3 million. For a conservation project, so just a single project, would be $250,000, and there's a 25% match requirement for this conservation grant fund. All right, so getting close to the end. So just to go over kind of the application process, this is right now focused on our clean water and drinking water SRF programs because those have been, up and running and we have those operational. We take applications year round for those. We will be giving out updates on how to apply for the other funds, the Water Supply Development Fund and the Water Conservation Grant Fund. In the next, hopefully, few weeks, months at the most, we'll have those ready to go. But for now, if you're interested in the SRF funding, basically you just go to our website. It's azwifa.gov. You click on the button that says apply now. It'll take you to the application portal or applicant.azwifa.gov. You fill out the project priority list application or PPL application. It's very high level details about your project. It's going to get you onto our list, onto our radar, get you assigned a project manager who will walk you through all the rest of the steps. We will then have you work on getting debt authorization, which is typically a resolution from your governing body. If you're in a city or town that's less than 150,000, it would be just a resolution. For cities and towns over 150,000, it typically requires a voter authorization, voter approval, I mean. But we do also have Senate Bill 1067, which allows for some of the larger cities to come to us just with a resolution. I can definitely go over those details if anyone has questions about how to get that authorization. But basically, yep, you'll get authorization to really apply for debt. We will send you the complete project finance application, which is our second application, has more details about your project, about the finances of the system. We'll do a whole write-up, present it to our board, and then we, get it approved by our board, and then we'll get you a loan that's actually executed. You can start drawing down funds. We do work on a reimbursement basis, so you have to start incurring the cost, start getting invoices from your contractors, have the project start. You submit those to us, we pay you, and then you can pay your contractor. And then, yeah, you just work through the project. You'll have a project manager the whole time to make sure you're understanding WIFA's requirements, come out and do site checks, helps you, comply with all the Davis-Bacon and American Iron and Steel requirements, and then work until, the project is done. So that's basically our process. And I think, yep, that was my last slide. So I'm happy to open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a great presentation. A lot of good information. There is a number of questions for you. The first question, I guess Linda can answer it, or you can answer it as well. How could you be a private drinking water company and not be regulated by the ACC? Is the first question.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll let Linda jump in too, because I know she's worked with quite a few of them, but it is something that we didn't really consider in the past as a issue, but we started getting, hearing from more and more. I think they're typically, I mean, they're very small. We've worked with, it's like co-ops or something that they're just not regulated by the ACC, but they are technically a public water system. So we wanted to make sure they had some options, especially for the ones that were, looking at, they had some sort of violation, like they had arsenic exceedance and they were having a hard time getting funding because our policy previously was only for ACC regulated companies. So we did open it up. I don't know, Linda, if you want to add on any more.
Well, I guess it kind of comes down to the word private. There's a number of different types of corporate structures, and not all of them are ACC regulated. Again, if you're a political subdivision, if you're a nonprofit, so it really kind of depends on what you are. And we and WIFA and USDA, we can work with people to try and figure out, exactly who should be regulating you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. The next question is from Gary, and he says, we are a privately owned public water and wastewater system governed by the ACC. Are we eligible for financing future projects? I think you already answered it, but just to
Yes.
reiterate.
Yeah, just to reiterate, yes, on the drinking water side. Unfortunately, we cannot on the wastewater side, which would be out of our clean water SRF, we cannot do loans with private wastewater systems, and that's going back to basically federal law. The Clean Water Act kind of restricts it. So there's nothing we can do as far as changing policy or procedure on that end. It is something that we wish we could do, but
Okay, perfect. And then the next two questions, I believe you already covered. I think they were asked before you presented on it. What is the definition of a disadvantaged community? And then are colonias considered disadvantaged communities? So I think you already covered that with one of your slides.
Yep.
Okay, so and then the next question, for determining a disadvantaged community, it says, McNeil, Arizona, what can be done where there's an extreme wealth disparity? So, example, people of means put in private wells, poor folks are in the same town water system and have difficulty paying their monthly bills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is definitely difficult. Well, there's a few things. So, I mean, it could still be that the community is going to qualify as disadvantaged. It does get difficult when you have, some people in the higher salary range that kind of bump up the whole town, and then the areas that should, still be qualifying are not anymore. But we have an option, basically, like if we were doing a project in a community where the overall community has a fairly high MHI, but the project really is only to serve a subsection of that community where they are, if you look at them alone, um, as a community, as a subset of that community, their MHI is lower, they're going to qualify as disadvantaged. So basically we can look, with a more focused viewpoint on the communities that actually is getting the benefits of the project to see if that smaller subset of the community is going to qualify as disadvantaged, get that extra incentives of the the forgivable principal added on for those types of projects. But yeah, it is a difficult question when if some of the wealthier people are just taking care of their own water needs and leaving the rest of the community. I don't know if I have an answer for that.
Sounds good. The next question is in regards to colonias. So where can we find a list of federally designated colonias? And he said, I see one prepared by the Arizona Department of Housing, but I'm not sure if it's the same list as the feds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it is a difficult thing. We do use the Arizona Department of Housing, so if you're on there, that works. I think we've used a list that we've gotten from USDA way back, a long time ago. It's something you can always reach out to us, and we can look at the list that we have saved. But yeah, besides the housing departments, I don't know if they're all readily available online. So if you're not sure, you can ask us. If you have to be, I think it's 100 miles from the border. So that's a good place to start. If you're with, kind of close to the border, then you can reach out to us and we can try to help you figure out if you're serving a colonia or not.
Right. Okay. And then next. Oh,
Jeff,
go ahead.
I don't know if
Yes.
Jeff Hayes is on. I don't know if the USDA list is official or available. The other thing is a colonia is 100 kilometers or 63 miles, which makes it a little complicated.
Oh, yeah, 100 kilometers, right?
Yeah, that metric system.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can
Jeff
be a
is
little
on.
bit of a gray area, certainly, but
Jeff, is there anything you want to add? He is on, so he can comment.
Sure. Well, and so each agency does address it a little differently. We tend to be, like I said, there's stuff that is handed down through HUD, which is typically would be passed on through the housing agencies. The whole element is based on the Cranston-Gonzalez Act from '88, I think it is, which talks about that mileage border element, and that the community had to exist and the conditions had to essentially exist or generally be present at the time that the community was formed back in that era or had existed back and then. But that doesn't stop us from having new colonias designated as long as they still meet that criteria. So we've had communities done just within the last 2 or 3 years designated to address because of the health and safety issues in the community. So it's an ever evolving process. We do have an extensive list that was put together with a priority with RCAC. We also have the HUD list. So we're always happy to share that because we're continuing to add that on. I think we've added 2 in the last couple of years. And in our case, a county or a tribe can self-designate that community. So that would be at the local level to receive that designation as long as they can meet that criteria, and then we'll honor that designation. That may be different under Lindsay's side. They may have a little more restrictions on it, but from our side, we're able to usually be a little more flexible about that.
Great.
Yeah.
That sounds good. All right, we'll move on to the next questions. Do non-transient, non-community water systems serving less than 5,000 people qualify for WIFA loan?
It could be a non-community water system as long as it is a nonprofit. It cannot be a for-profit non-community system.
All right, so nonprofit, non-transient, non-community.
Yeah.
All right, and then the next question. For the Water Supply Development Fund, if the Douglas Basin AMA is approved in November 2022, will that make that area ineligible for funding?
That's a good question. That's a tough one. I mean, possibly, but I would say, you would not be ineligible as it stands right now. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I guess it could be a case by case when it happens. We can address it. The next question is from Kelly. It says, what are the match requirements for the different funds?
Yeah, so the our state revolving funds, the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF, there's no match requirements. It is a loan program. We give out grant-like loan forgiveness, but there's no actual grants, so there's no matching, grant funds that are required from our borrowers for the SRF funds. The Water Supply Development Fund does have some grant component to it. As far as what we've been reading in the law, I haven't seen anything that's going to require us to have a match for those grant funds that we're giving out. That might be something we decide to do. Like I said, we're still working through like all of our policy and procedure updates for the Water Supply Development Fund. So that's to be determined. The Water Conservation Grant Fund has a 25% match that was written into the law as a minimum. So,
All right, that sounds good. And I think you've answered the next question. So the next question is just for the Water System Development Fund. It's not the AMA criteria that excludes funding. It's just being part of AMAs in urban areas that exclude funding, correct? So I think you kind of
yeah,
addressed that already.
yeah.
And next question is, one of my system provides water at no charge to federal facilities. The infrastructure was damaged during a wildfire and needs to be replaced or upgraded. The facilities are privately owned, but the land they're on is owned by the U.S. Forest Service. Are there financing options for this system?
So it is a privately owned, what type of facility? It's a for.
It's a privately owned facility, but they provide water to federal facilities.
Okay.
And the infrastructure was damaged during a wildfire. And also they're on land that's owned by the U.S. Forest Service.
So, yeah, we'd have to look into it more. I mean, the question would be, one, is it considered a public water system? Typically we can't work with like federally owned systems, but if it's a privately owned system selling water to federal, I'm assuming maybe for firefighting operations or something. I'm not totally sure. It's something we certainly could look into, and if that person wants to reach out to me, and we can discuss more of the details of it. But basically, yeah, it has to be, as long as it's a public water system, regulated, serving water. It's not a federally owned facility. It should be eligible. We can't do projects that are primarily for fire protection. So if it's running lines out into the forest to help with forest fighting activities, that's not going to be eligible. But
makes sense, yeah. Next question is, would your loan program partner with other agencies like NatBank?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've actually just been having a few meetings with NatBank about some potential co-funding options. So we always are happy to do co-funding. We've done lots of projects co-funded with USDA, NatBank, different funding agencies. So always happy to do that.
Perfect. And there's another question about, do PFAS and or lead related projects qualify as addressing a public health threat?
Yes, and actually that's something that we're clarifying right now in our policy, that if someone has one of those types of projects, it's automatically going to qualify. It's always been a bit of a tricky one, especially with like the PFAS, because traditionally what we've always said is if you have a violation in hand, that you have an arsenic exceedance, you need to add on some treatment, that is a project that clearly is resolving a public health threat. Obviously for PFAS, it's they're working on getting it regulated and everything, and have set the limits now, but you're not going to have a violation for it. But we certainly, you know, take it case by case, and in those types of instances, yeah, I think we can make a strong argument. It's resolving a public health threat. Same thing with the lead service lines. You know, there's a big health component to getting those replaced and even doing the inventory. So yeah, those will automatically qualify as solving a public health threat and get you a little more loan forgiveness for those too.
Okay, perfect. Related to that, could a public utility be eligible for a lead inventory project that is already underway?
Yes, yeah, they could be certainly. We do have, you know, some requirements that have to be met. Obviously, for inventory projects, there's no actual construction, so that makes it a little easier because you're not having to worry about, you know, am I complying with Davis-Bacon and the American Iron Steel requirements? Because if you start a project before you get funding approved from us and you want to be reimbursed for any of that, you have to make sure you have followed all of WIFA requirements. For inventory projects, obviously a little bit easier, but we still, you know, want to get that conversation started as early as possible because we want to make sure any other requirements are being met as far as, you know, you're able to show that you have done procurement in the right way and, you know, a few other things. So should be eligible, but definitely
Makes
get
sense.
that conversation started early to make sure you're following any other kind of steps that need to be followed to get reimbursed for costs that you've already been incurring.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Lindsay. You have 1 more minute, so I have one last question for you. So
Okay.
this question is from Lorena. So for a small public water system that's having nitrate high values, it's getting close to the MCL. Do they approach WIFA if they get the MCL violation, or can they start now before this gets before it gets serious? What is the process for the system representative to reach out?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely want you to talk to us before you have a violation in hand, and that's where we will make that kind of judgment call on, like, all right, they don't have a violation yet, but they are getting close, and if they don't add in treatment, it will become a public health threat, and I think we could qualify projects like that as resolving public health threats. So certainly talk to us before the violation. I know DEQ would also love for you to talk to us before you actually get a violation. So and then, yeah, the process really is just go to our website, azwifa.gov. We have all of our contact information on our website too. You can always reach out to me directly, but it's really just putting in that preliminary application. We're also happy to, you know, walk through it step by step with you if you have questions about it. So just reaching out, email, phone calls. We have our main line on our website. You can always call that main line and you'll get directed to the correct person to talk to at WIFA. So
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. I was just going to say that as well. ADEQ strongly encourages you to address it before it becomes an MCL, and we can assist through our technical assistance program as well. So do reach out to us and WIFA, and we can help you.
Well, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Hayes. I'm the Community Programs Director for USDA Rural Development here in Arizona. And I'll just start off by saying I'm jealous of Lindsay. They've got all these new programs and opportunities there, and we're still sort of doing the same old thing. So I'll try to expand on that as much as I can here. What I want to look at is when we approach our program, of course, when I say community programs, we work on both different angles of both the water and wastewater facilities, but we also handle a lot of other things within the community. As USD is sort of a one-stop shop for all community needs. So this little slide kind of addresses all the things of housing, the infrastructure, community facilities, business development, and of course, regional planning whenever possible. So I'll just say when we meet with communities, and especially myself, we really try to look at not just a specific issue, but all the issues in the community, because utilities in the cities usually are a anchor element to all the things that are going on in town. They're aware of all the different issues. And so when we are meeting with people, we like to try to bring up the opportunities to discuss all the needs of the community, not just the specific water or wastewater issues. So just kind of keep that in mind. If there's opportunities come up, to please reach out and give us a call. We can try to help address that. And So, and I'll just start this out by saying, there's a lot of different ways to approach these projects. We try to keep it pretty simple. The best thing we always suggest is you just start off with a phone call instead of trying to figure out our programs. If you come to us and try to reach out by email or phone call or through your consultant, it's more often easier to sit down in 10 or 15 minutes and frame out your product and where we can go with it than you guys trying to fit yourself into one of our boxes. So let us do the creative side of that and come to us with your needs. And then we find that's a lot more healthier and the product's a lot more easier because we're addressing all those things up front and kind of setting up the expectations. But basic elements of our funding is, of course, our primary element is loans, direct and guaranteed now. So that's a new facet that our guaranteed loan growth has expanded its population limits, and so I'll talk about that here in a minute. Of course, the grants are great. Of course, they're as always limited. Our typical programming is the max of any product with a health and safety issue is 75% grant. Without a health and safety, the max would be a 45% grant. But there are other extenuating circumstances, so it's not an automatic threshold. These are just statutory limits. The Colonial program is unique to one of the 4 states that we have, and it's a great tool we use. We typically only get about $3 million of that a year, but we're actually one of the more, we get typically money from all the other states because they don't utilize it as much as we do. And so typically we're tripling or quadrupling that when we access our products to the national office or sweeping states, funds from other states. The Colonial program, though, in itself is that allows us to expend over that percentage that are set. If it's a Colonial and it's a health and safety issues, most likely they're going to get 75% grant. But what we look at is then they're able to go over that threshold and further grant fund the project if necessary. And but it's also one of the only programs that allows, and ours is that allows us to go onto the private property and hook the house up to water or sewer, and or especially with sewer, disable and abandon the septic tanks and eliminate those and hook the house up to the sewer system. So we isolate that as a separate side product, but those is a great tool for that because it really helps get community consensus around it when they don't have to pay for the additional hookups and septics. And of course, there's always a couple of people who just put a new septic system in and not too happy, but overall community-wise, it's a good thing. We also have a tribal set aside for projects, again, and these are blended in sometimes, or sometimes they're standalone projects. But for tribal projects, we can do up to $2 million per project, and that's a grant only. But most LISA projects, we tend to be a blend of different sources of funding. And again, we look at it from the behind the scenes things. We're matching the monies and trying to put it to very different pools of funds that we have. And under each one of these programs, we have separate set-asides and different internal structures that we're able to tap into, which helps us augment our normal state allocation. Our search grants, these are kind of a pre-development, so up to $30,000 is very similar to what WIFA does and ADQ offers. We can utilize those programs just as well, or sometimes match them if the product requires additional dollars, but typically we're able to get around $30,000 to do a very basic preliminary engineering report. That allows us then to segue into the program. Those are search grants are really for towns under 5,000 or communities under 5,000. There is no expectation that the product has to come back to USDA. Of course, we always appreciate that business. We have another side component called PPG, and that's for towns that are a little bit larger, over 5,000, and the same amount of dollars, but the expectation is that that application will generate a project and it'll be funded through us in whole or part. So we're always, again, like WIFA and others, willing to share and divide the projects up. Just when we do that, we just try to kind of separate the products so they're standalone, so the monies necessarily don't touch, but still complete a complete project. And last but not least, we do our technical assistance grants with the Circuit Rider program, with Rural Water Association, training, solid waste, and also Rural Community Assistance Corporation's team. And they're funded also by EPA as well, and this in the state, to provide assistance to that. And we're trying to expand that expand that program into where there's a little more hands-on technical help in developing the applications up front. So we're doing more of a high-level team approach so that it's both the community, the technical assistance providers, and our staff moving these projects forward. So we get applications year-round. We always are willing to work on applications on that. Our sweet spot of our funding while we're on a fiscal year is October to September. We will start getting monies usually late November, early December, and then we certainly get our allocation around January to March, and then we're off and running. So we still can fund projects. We just have to go through a little few hoops and go to our national office to do that. But what we like to do is have these things stacked and loaded, so ready to go. And so we're always getting willing to work and get these things started. From the time we actually get a completed preliminary engineering report and environmental, we're actually usually making an approval process within about 60 days. So it's unless there's some hiccups that come along, but otherwise we're able to make those decisions. The key is getting all that package put in place. But what we're doing is, again, let's just start that conversation out, get people going around the table, make sure we're all setting up the expectation for timing and issues. So what are the things that we do with fund and financing elements? Of course, it goes just like everybody else. We're funding for clean and reliable drinking water systems. We work with eligible entities such as cities, towns, municipal property corporations, something very prevalent here in Arizona, water districts or any kind of district, and nonprofit organizations, and of course any federally recognized tribe and or their utility entities, depending on how they're structured. Project area must be an eligible area. Most tribal trust lands are eligible. When we say an eligible area, the population's typically under 10,000 or the service area is under 10,000. So there are times where we separate the product from a thing. We did this up in Sedona, where the district was established and the town grew up around it, but the service area remained the same. And so while the town's population was higher, the service district was still eligible, and we were able to make those funding commitments. So we try to, again, look at it as creatively as possible. But the general concept is that for our direct loans and grants, the communities would be 10,000 and under. For our guaranteed loans, they've raised that up to 50,000, so that opens us up to a wider variety of communities. The terms were long-term financing with low interest loans. Typically right now our loans are running around 2% interest rate on the low level, and we can go up to 40 years based on the useful life of the facility. There is no prepayment penalty. So we look at this at a point of that you can prepay this all the time, but what we're trying to do is set up a structure that keeps it as long as possible terms, it's affordable, and meeting the lifespans of the expectation of the systems to be funded. Then at this point, once we've I'll go through the steps and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If funds are available, grant can be combined with a loan to keep those costs reasonable, and we'll talk a little bit about that down the road. And of course, we're looking at this. The key thing for us is that we do require a preliminary engineering report. So we encourage working with and we've done this quite a bit with Linda's team, using their pre-development costs and their designs when they do those projects, and then we can fund them. But we have this other program, and actually they can be matched for $30,000 a pop. Some other purposes, legal engineering fees, land acquisition and water and land rights, permits, equipment, startup operations. Especially we do get quite a few of the groups, especially like when they're starting a new water, like a DWID, brand new startup, we're able to fund some costs for getting that thing operational, staffing and maintenance, etc. And of course, if you're purchasing a system, which we've done several times, we're taking a for-profit and brought it in, or another entity that's collapsed and brought it into a DWID, or another entity or nonprofit organization. We can purchase those things, but when we do the purchase, there has to be some improvements to it, and generally it's the case that there are systems have been in decline and needs those upgrades. So the purchase can be made, but it always has to have some kind of improvements that could be easily putting in meters or some other minor upgrades on that. Again, that's where we encourage the conversations, because there are a wide variety of opportunities and everybody's program and project a little different. So we try to look at tailoring that and see if there's a best match, and or if there's a need to bring another partner to the table on that. I talked about the tribal set-aside. This is a key element for us. We can layer this project on other funding, but sometimes when we do have projects, we did this just up outside of Loop on a decentralized well program to try to treat some of the wells up on the Navajo Nation that are community wells but aren't really regulated by any entity. And so we're trying to hook these things up as a on-site treated wellhead, with then setting up a kind of community water system off of that. So these are a little more hybrid programs, but we recognize that there's a need there, and that's projects that typical entities like NTOA would not be able to provide funding for. So Again, the flexibility is there, but it can be any other traditional system as well. So one of the things we talk about the guaranteed financing. So this opens up a whole new market for us. These can be typically entities that have a little higher, a little more sophisticated, stronger financial cash flow. They can work with commercial lenders like Live Oak Bank or CoBank or their local lender. The element of this is it's a faster, more fleet process. We will guarantee 80% of the loan to the lender so that their risk is diminished to only 20%. Same typical eligible applicants, cities, nonprofits. When we look at this, nonprofits fall under how homeowner associations fall under those eligibility if they're properly set up. And so what we're finding is that this may be a new niche for us, and we'll get a lot of these homeowner associations that are in rural areas that have their own water system or sewer system or need to put one in. This would be a resource to do that since they're not a traditional entity. They can go to a local lender, do that, and then we'll guarantee that loan. Getting the populations under that 50,000 limit. The streamlined process is we do not really go with a preliminary engineering report. It's just an environmental rules review. So with that concept is that they're really looking at something that makes a justifiable decision for a bank to make a loan on, which would be just some kind of engineer's estimate, but it doesn't necessarily go through the thorough review that we would do, and we're not questioning that. We're just ensuring that there's environmental compliance. The key thing on that is we're generally within 30 days from the bank submitting its application. The material says we're approving that commitment to the bank and letting them move forward. It also opens up some higher income areas, so there's no income restrictions. So HRAs such as that, or stronger systems that want a faster turnaround and don't necessarily want to go shopping around for it. So we've done quite a few of these already. We're hoping to expand that more. Our greatest demand, of course, this year has been dealing with some of the cost overruns that are going on. But we do encourage if you see we're working with groups that to explore this opportunity. And it can be a blend too. We can also do a direct and a guarantee together as needed if possible. Especially if there's equipment that's maybe a shorter lifetime, but as a shorter life cycle, we can fund that with the guaranteed portion of it, and then maybe do longer infrastructure development with us. So just kind of the key theme this year has been cost overruns, as you can, you guys have probably encouraged already or encountered. These are just projects we funded this last year. This has been a dominating factor for us, and we're going to see this obviously in the next few years as this thing keeps rolling through. Some of these projects were funded several years ago, and now we're coming out with the new reality check. But you can see sort of the factor here is predominantly what we're only doing about $12 million in loans. We're doing equal to that or more in grants, higher, especially when we factor in the Colonia funding comes into play. So we expect this to continue. Cost overruns do have a higher priority for us when we tap into our national funding. Smaller scale projects will fund at the state level, a lot of our allocation, especially because it tends to be a little bit more timely and we can address it. But when we're running into projects like we did here at the community of TACNA, the cost overrun almost doubled the size of the project, and so we were having to tap into, and it was a Colonia, so we were able to have to coordinate that with our national office to access funds from their level. So again, where we're still pushing through, we actually have a pretty good strong backlog coming that we carried over this year. And then we expect at least another half of those number of projects that we have that'll be going in with cost overruns again. So again, we're looking and trying to address this as much as possible. We haven't had any real new allocation of how we're going to do this or addressing our normal underwriting requirements, but we do expect this to be an ongoing process for the next few years. So when we're talking about applying, aside from the normal, as I suggest, the phone call, we try to get used to some of the regulations and stuff. You can, of course, apply anytime you're, but we do want to try to set up that time and create a timeline so we have that expectation. There is key elements of this thing. We do have a system called RD Apply, but that aside is that you do need to register for your SAM's number and what they call the UEI, the Uniform Entity Identification Numbers. Those are things that are key. We can start an application without those processes, but before we can make a funding commitment, those numbers have to be in place and kept up, which is a key thing. but several projects that staff changes happened and their SAMS numbers expired, and the systems were overwhelmed. It took months to get that thing squared away. So this is part of our new world of technology. We have to keep these things going. SAMS is the universal, essentially, system that allows us to fund all entities that are vendors, right? So any product that comes through, whether you're a contractor or an applicant, that funding, that is a system that is being used to disperse those funds so they can retrieve the monies electronically. So some of the underwriting criteria, let me just go back 1 second and I'll talk about I mentioned here is the RD Apply system. We do have an online system. We encourage people to use it. And what that putting is the onus of inputting a lot of information is done at the local level. That rolls up to us, so there's less errors. We still will review it and evaluate that information and can make adjustments if necessary. But the idea is that the applicant is front loading a lot of that detail to us, and that saves us a lot of time in the underwriting process because we have to essentially rebuild those things in our system. So that application process, it is not a mandate. We do prefer it, and we do have products, especially with the search grants or some of the smaller scale products, in time as need, we can take paper applications still without a problem. So just want to make sure that people understand that that is still a viable option. So underwriting criteria. So end of the day, regardless of what group you're working with, I think you're going to see is that we have the same eligible or designed outcomes in terms of impacts, the cost of the system. We just may approach it from different angles and different systems here. Low-income area products with the health and safety issues, as I mentioned before, are eligible for the 75% grant. That is not automatic. And I'll go through this process. We look at the evaluation of taking on debt, and we look at the cost of EDU, or equivalent dwelling unit. And when we take that debt, we're applying all the debt, the operational costs, reserves for debt and short-lived assets to try to come up with the cost of that operation. Then we're going to compare that cost per equivalent dwelling unit to other similar systems within that region. And so we're not comparing a metropolitan area to a small system. We're trying to find that up. We utilize WIFA's website and looking at those similar system costs for those comparisons. We also have a national database as well that we tap into. And the point of that goal is that we're basically, and it's a national rule now, especially for we're tapping into our larger dollars from reserves from our national team, is that the equivalent dwelling unit rate has to be equivalent to 1.5% of the median income for that household, median household income for that community. So we're looking at this as a scalable thing to look at it. Some communities have good revenue sources and they're bringing it in, and that brings that cost down. But what we're seeing is their typical user rates for water are ranging from anywhere from 35 to 45. That's something pretty close to being sewer is the same thing. It depends on the cost of types of treatment they're running into. But we do have groups regularly that are at least 2% or higher in their costs because of the cost of treatment and the small number of users in that system. So we're applying all these filters into place. And then, of course, when we talk about that 75% level, colonies are exempt for that. But to get to that colonie dollars, we're still looking at that user rate being of that percentage or higher. So when we're looking at all these factors in there, we're trying to come up with it's not quite a sophisticated science, but it is an art process to develop a cost per user. And then we're working with the entities as we go through that process to make sure that they're compatible with that and they're acceptable, those rates of terms that we come up with. Again, we're trying to use that. Sometimes we're able to tap into additional pools of funding to bring in other resources. We talked a little bit about that, we have our planning grants, the SECTI fundings. We have persistent poverty funds, which are patching for Navajo, Apache counties, Graham County, and Santa Cruz counties. These open up some additional dollars that we're able to bring into the table, not necessarily meeting the thresholds or exceeding those outside of the colonia, but from the attempt of we're able to bring more dollars to the table, to the product, and tap into those resources. So, and again, we'll try to mix other sources too. If we can come to the table, or a separated product or other resource come into, like NADBank, we try to just isolate the products so that they're each have a separate component, so the bidding documents and contracts match. We do not require Davis-Bacon wages, although some project areas the costs are equivalent. But we do have the American Iron and Steel, and of course now the new administration come in with this BABA, which is Buy American, Build Back Better programs. That we're going to see that cost influx change again as well. So that is something we've got a 6-month waiver on, but we're going to see probably starting in the early January of next year that those costs are going to start going up and they'll be escalating to products. So again, this is why we try to have an open line of communication. So we're evaluating these projects. We're working with communities on this stuff to have those discussions to make sure that they're clear about what they're going to be, what their costs are going to be, and the funding opportunities that we can present. We just had a recent project with groups out of Graham County that as we went all the way through this process, we really weren't able to justify a health and safety issue. A lot of the issues had already been previously addressed. But we've gone back with Linda's team to evaluate those projects and see if we can do it. So our goal is to make, not that we want to find problems, but we want to bring as much grant dollars as we can. And the goal of these grant dollars are really to minimize that cost, that debt service, when we're looking at the cost of operation, any other existing debt, and making sure that we have reserves set up to make sure the projects are going to not run into those issues in the future. We really try to take all that in advantage so that we can bring in grant dollars to raise those keep that cost high, and then use the grant dollars to do it. Same principle that WIF is doing with the forgivable loan, so we're just approaching it from just different methodologies there. So the approval process, again, I keep saying this over and over again, but start with that conversation. Really helpful, whether it's yourselves or your engineer, depending where you're at, get that call into us or an email. We look at the preliminary engineering report and the environmental review. That is usually done as a part of the preliminary or extension of the environmental is, and that can be done and funded through the search grants as well. Underwriting criteria is we're going to look at the demographics of the community. We don't really call whether it's distress or not. We're really using the demographics based on the current census. Right now, we're still using 2010 census data. Some point probably after January, that'll come into the 2020 census data. We look at then the population of the community as well as their median household income, and then we compare that to the state's non-metro median. So we are taking everything in comparison for rural areas and not factoring in the higher income areas of some of the urbanized areas. So that case, we're then comparing it to these EDUs rates, which again I mentioned is the operational costs, your debt service, any reserves, and then any remaining, essentially identifying whatever remaining debt capacity is, and then looking at that as providing what we can fund for you in loans, and then what we can bring to you dollars. And if there is not eligibility for grant, without that, we will explore that and see what we can do. But generally, the worst case scenarios we're running into is a 40% grant for the project. We do fund committed, our funding committed is based on the preliminary engineering report. At that point, you know that your money is locked in, the interest rates are fixed at that rate, and then you know you can move forward into design. So the concept is we're funding it on the concept and then allow you to move into that next stage. Proceeding to design, you're then either going to self-fund that or get some bridge financing. WIFA provides funding, so that's smaller systems. We also work extensively with the Arizona Community Foundation. They have set up a $5 million loan fund just to work with rural development projects, specifically those more rural, smaller communities. That cost of bridge financing for both the construction and or design can be burdensome. We work with them and they offer a low interest loan for that, and in some cases even smaller loans to do these programs to keep the project moving forward, and then so we're reducing the burden on the system. Then we're going out and actually doing the bid process and then going into construction. If a project's got less than $500,000 debt, we will direct finance it and go forward. Any project that's got over $500,000 in debt, then we were going to have to provide that interim financing as well. Again, variety of different sources that we use for that can be the Arizona Community Foundation for smaller systems. WIFA's funds are available, and we also do a lot with CoBank as well. And then essentially what's happening is then we're doing our takeout for the loan amount. So we'll build the project, construct it up to that point with the interim financing, and once we reach that tentative loan amount, then we'll close that out, use our loan funds to take it out, and then we grant fund the rest of the project as we go forward. So it's not really that complicated process, but there's a lot of moving parts, and there's again why we try to keep the conversation going on in communication. So really, that's kind of it. I know we don't have. I will want to add into. It was brought up the questions about the PFAS and lead. We do have separate funding pools for that. We don't necessarily have an allocation per state, but if projects do bring those in, we're able to tap into that project, and we're treating it as a health and safety concern, which then just opens up additional grant dollars to address those issues. And really, that's it. The cost, again, I just stress these cost overruns are going to be a critical factor. So we're encouraging projects to get in early so that we can identify a pipeline, so that we are addressing our systems of what's going to be needed for each fiscal year. So if we don't have a project in place, we can't argue the fact that we need that money in place. With that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a lot of good info. We have one question. I was trying to go over it. It's a pretty long question, but I think the person wants us to contact them directly. Let me see here. I can read it to you to see if you have any comments on it, but the person did provide their contact information for us to follow up. But to read it to you, so it just says, I am a chairman of the board of Naco Sanitary District. We serve the small border community of Naco, about 1,000 people. Years of mismanagement and no maintenance left the system out of compliance. The newly elected board has spent much money to bring the system back into ADQ compliance, and now our funds are depleted. We need a lot of work done. We need to fix our billing. Over half of the community doesn't pay the service fee. Prior administrations never increased rates and was billing half the customers who are working to correct these issues but really need some help. Our facilities are located on a 50-acre land adjacent to Arizona Water Company, city of Bisbee Wellfield. We also have a large section of Greenbush Draw and major stone flow drainage to the San Pedro River. We have the perfect location to recharge, reuse treated water, and build a stormwater mitigation system. Greenbush Draw is also designated as an impaired water by ADQ. Bisbee uses Greenbush Draw, the place they put their wastewater treatment plant effluent. It runs about 2 miles down the stream bed, all privately owned property until it enters our property. This effluent does not have PFAS, organic compounds, perfumes, and so on removed from it. Landowner has built levees on the property boundaries. I'll scroll down. So basically, we have an opportunity to create a great system to keep our aquifer clean and our drinking water safe. I think this is going to be a case where we have to contact them directly.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to, they can reach out to me, or if you can give me their information, we'll reach out and talk to them. It sounds a lot to digest there, and some of that kind of broke up a little bit with the mic. But again, most probably there's an opportunity. There's nothing we can really do to go back and retro approve stuff that's already done in health safety issues. That's what we prefer to be, again, on the front end of that, just like everybody else is, so that we can help capture that and to create a more sustainable system. But there still may be other things that need to be done to the system that we can still address that meet those needs. And so, again, when we look at smaller systems that have kind of been nickel and dime to death, we want to look at the whole system. There's opportunities to bring in other users to make the product a little bit more cost effective and viable, because we are going to be able to get grant to it. It's better to fund as much as possible to bring the product up to speed as probable, so that we can capture and make it a sustainable system for the next 40, 50 years, rather than going back into constant piecemealing of this thing together. I will bring up, and it sounded like there was a little bit of issue maybe with some drought concerns, and I didn't mention earlier, is we do have funding that are emergency grants for anything tied to disasters, which would be could be flood, it could be the drought is considered of course statewide disaster in Arizona. So we can do up to $1 million of repairs for any water source issue and or small mechanical elements of the equipment. We can do smaller grants for that. So if there is a decline in water quality or water supply, those things would be open to us, again, to direct grants only. We still require that preliminary engineering report. It can be much abbreviated if it's not involved with treatment. And again, we can provide that search grant to lead into that. And we use Yarnell as a great example because of they had back-to-back fires, but also back-to-back floods. And we actually pieced together, I think it was like 4 or 5 different emergency grants to put the product to get it back and sustainable. And now they're coming back to us now for a complete system overhaul and the rest of the system to bring it up so that they have a newly formed and developed system that will last for a lifetime. So again, there's a lot of different ways to attract those products, and that's where we just have that conversation and get all our cards on the table and start that plan on what's the best way to approach it. And if there's other resources we can bring to it. So my email's up on the board. You can always feel free to call that or my number as well, and they can reach out and talk to us and start that conversation.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am Lisa Rivera. I'm a natural resources specialist with the Bureau of Reclamation's Phoenix area office. And so this morning I'm going to speak about reclamation funding opportunities, particularly our WaterSmart grants. And so this is an overview of what I'll be presenting today. So just briefly describe who Reclamation is in case you're not familiar. I'll talk about our WaterSmart funding opportunities, and then I'll describe a bit about the selection and funding process. That also includes the environmental and cultural resource compliance and some tips to help you if you are seeking to apply for one of our funding opportunities. And then I'll briefly go over a few additional funding opportunities that Reclamation offers outside of the WaterSmart program. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So again, I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation, and our mission is to manage, develop, and protect water and related resources in an environmentally and economically sound manner in the interest of the American public. And so our work is focused on the Western United States, and we're broken into different regions here in Arizona, except for a tiny sliver at the top of the state. We are in the lower Colorado Basin, or the Department of the Interior Region 8. And so again, I'm going to focus primarily on our WaterSmart program. This is an acronym that stands for Sustain and Manage America's Resources for Tomorrow. And so through this program, we seek to increase water supply reliability through investments and attention to local water conflicts, to support water conservation and water management improvements. It leverages both federal and non-federal funding, and we hope that applicants are collaborating with stakeholders to develop local solutions to their water supply issues. And so there's a variety of different programs within WaterSmart itself, and I will talk about each of these, but just briefly, we have our Basin Studies program that focuses on collaborative planning, the Title 16 program, which focuses on water reclamation and reuse, our WaterSmart grants focus on water conservation and efficiency, our Regional Water Conservation Field Services program focused on water conservation planning and design. The Drought Response Program deals with planning and building resilience to drought. And then the Cooperative Watershed Management Program focused on watershed management and restoration. And through these different programs, Reclamation supports water supply reliability for multiple types of water users. And through these different programs, with their different focuses, we can assist through everything from the planning process to implementing the process on the ground, as well as developing science and tools to help understand. So we have a breakdown here of where some of our different grants can help, and I'll try to point this out as I go along in describing each of them. So some overall basic information about this program. Most of the activities under WaterSmart are grant programs, though not all of them are, and I'll clarify which ones are not. There's generally a 50% non-federal cost share required for the grants. Again, I'll point out where this is different. In general, applicants include entities such as states, tribes, cities, water and irrigation districts, in some cases, conservation nonprofits and watershed groups are also eligible. And these entities also need to be in either the 17 Western United States, Alaska, Hawaii, or US territories. And then funding is allocated typically through an annual competitive process once each fiscal year. So I'm going to start with our Basin Study program, which has 3 different activities within it. First is the basin studies themselves. And so this is one of those cases where this is not a grant. It is actually a collaborative study. And these evaluate current and future water supply and demand imbalances, and then identify strategies to meet future water demands. And each basin study focuses on 4 things: state-of-the-art projections of future water supply and demand, analysis of how the basin's existing water and power operations and infrastructure will perform in the face of changing water realities. 3, the development of strategies to meet current and future water demands. And then 4, a trade-off analysis of the strategies identified. And so a 50% non-federal cost share is required for this. There are some basin studies that have recently completed in Arizona or near completion. And they're listed here. One was a Colorado River Basin study completed in 2012. And then we have the West Salt River Valley Basin study, which the final report should be coming very soon. The Lower Santa Cruz River Basin study, that final report is also expected in the next few months. And then the Eloy and Maricopa Stanfield Basin study is nearing its end, with the final report probably coming sometime next year. And then we have water management options pilots. This is kind of a secondary activity after a basin study has been completed. And these are technical efforts that build upon completed basin studies, such as additional updated or expanded analysis to further develop strategies that were identified in a basin study. And again, a 50% non-federal cost share is required. These are also not grants, these are pilots. And the funding that Reclamation provides must be used either for Reclamation staff time or for contractors. And this is just an example of some projects that have been funded through this in the past. There's a wide variety of things that it can be used for. So this is just some examples to give you an idea of what could be done with it. And then lastly, within basin studies, we have the applied science grants. And so these develop water management tools and hydraulic information, or may improve modeling and forecasting abilities. And funding for this requires a 50% non-federal cost share, and up to $200,000 in federal funding can be awarded. The projects need to be completed within 2 years. And this is one case in which universities are also an eligible applicant, as long as they partner with an entity that has water delivery authority. All right, now I'm going to focus on a regional program, the Water Conservation Field Services Program. This has 5 activities within it. And again, we are in the lower Colorado basin here in most of Arizona. The first activity is water management planning. And so this can be used to document data on current water supply and demand, prepare forecasts for future water demands, identify water conservation goals, and determine conservation measures. And so activities can be either to develop or update a water management plan or a water conservation plan. 50% non-federal cost share is required, and funding can be awarded up to $100,000. Next is the System Optimization Review, or SOR. And the SOR is a review to identify needed water management improvements to create a plan of action with recommendations for implementing specific improvements. And again, a 50% non-federal cost share is required, and awards can be up to $100,000. And then also through the Water Conservation Field Service Program, we have an opportunity for designing water management improvements. So this is for design of projects, including necessary preliminary work such as surveying and gathering site-specific information. And so listed here are some of the eligible design activities. So again, this is just designing the projects, not actually implementing them. So conversion of open conveyance to closed conveyance, lining of canals, weirs, flumes, ramps, control structures for irrigation systems, installation of meters, SCADA, irrigation system, regulating reservoirs, aquifer storage, recovering ponds, and water storage ponds. And again, 50% non-federal cost share is required for up to a $100,000 award. And then one of the interesting grants that we offer is the Demonstrating Conservation Project Technologies. In general, our grants must be used for tried and true technologies, but this is a case where you're able to apply for something that's novel or maybe new to you or your area. And so activities include the installation and application of a particular technology in a new way or in a new setting, with the intent of answering questions about the reliability of the technology and then reporting the results to others for wider adoption. And so to qualify for this, your entity must not have conducted any portion of the proposed project or used the technology in the past. And again, this requires 50% non-federal cost share for awards up to $100,000. And then lastly, through our Water Conservation Field Service Program, we can also provide technical assistance by reclamation staff or services instead of funding. All right, now I'm going to talk about our Cooperative Watershed Management Program. We currently have one activity under this, our Phase 1. In the past, we did have a Phase 2, but this has now been incorporated in a newer funding opportunity called the Environmental Water Resources Projects, which I'll talk about a little later. So the Phase 1 provides funding to watershed groups or a group of folks who are seeking to form a watershed group to encourage diverse stakeholders to form local solutions to address their water management needs. So some of the activities that this can fund are development of a watershed group, conducting outreach activities, gathering data about a watershed, creating a watershed restoration or management plan, and then designing watershed management projects. This requires no non-federal cost share. This is about the only grant we offer that does not require any cost share. And up to $200,000 in reclamation funding can be awarded for a 2-year project. And a sufficiency review is required after 1 year to receive that second year of funding. We have a drought response program with 3 different activities within it. First is drought contingency planning. And so this is for the development of comprehensive drought plans or an update of a drought plan. And just to note that applications must participate in a reclamation technical consultation prior to submission of an application. So if this is something that you are interested in, do definitely reach out to reclamation, as there are some initial steps that you must go through in order to be eligible to submit an application. It requires a 50% non-federal cost share, although a reduction or waiver of cost share may be considered for applicants in exceptional circumstances, and up to $200,000 is provided. And this is through a cooperative agreement rather than a grant, which means that reclamation will be involved in the process. Our drought resiliency projects are for on-the-ground projects or modeling tools that increase water supply reliability or improve water management with the goal to build long-term resilience to drought. And so some of the eligible projects that can be funded through this are infrastructure improvements, new conveyance system components, additional water storage or recharge facilities, capture and treating alternative supplies, and decision support tools and modeling. A 50% non-federal cost share is required. And for this and some of the additional types of grants I'm going to talk to talk about in a little bit, there are different funding levels. So level 1 is for awards of up to $500,000 for a project that can be completed within 2 years. Level 2 is for up to $2 million for a project that can be completed within 3 years. And then level 3 is up to $5 million for a 3-year project. And then just a note, with these 3 different funding levels, applicants are only competing against other applicants in their own funding level. So the intention is to fund at least a few applications within each funding level. And our Drought Emergency Response Actions is an ongoing funding opportunity that we offer, and this is related to emergencies related to droughts. And so actions that can be taken by reclamation in response to an unanticipated circumstance in order to minimize losses and damages resulting from drought. And so some eligible project types could be temporary construction activities, water purchases such as water hauling, using a reclamation facility to convey and store water, and then other Title I authorized actions that do not involve construction of permanent facilities. Again, it's this kind of temporary short-term actions is the focus of this program. So we do accept applications on an ongoing basis. There is no cost share required for this, and funding availability is depending on appropriation. So again, I said that the opportunity is open year-round, but the availability of funding may differ throughout the course of a fiscal year. All right, and then within the WaterSmart program, we have a specific area called WaterSmart Grants with 4 activities within it. The first is the Water and Energy Efficiency Grants. And so this is to support projects that conserve and use water more efficiently, implement or increase renewable energy production, and mitigate risk of future water conflict. And so a focus of this grant is on quantifiable water and energy savings. So the higher the amount, the more competitive a proposal will be. And so eligible projects here, you'll see that this list is quite similar to the list that we had earlier under the Water Conservation Field Service Program grant that could fund design. So perhaps you could start with that grant and then actually implement a project using a water and energy efficiency grant for things like canal lining, piping, irrigation flow, SCADA, landscape irrigation measures, and that includes things like rebates for smart controllers, high efficiency nozzles, or turf removal. And also included are commercial cooling systems and cooling towers, high efficiency indoor appliances and fixtures, and also renewable energy projects that are related to water management and delivery. So perhaps hydropower, solar in relation to a water facility or delivery infrastructure, and also wind power. A 50% non-federal cost share is required. This also has 3 different funding groups of $500,000, $2 million, and $5 million. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Next is our small scale water efficiency projects. This is similar to the water and energy efficiency grants, but just on a much smaller scale. So it's on the ground projects that seek to conserve, better manage, or make more efficient use of water supplies. So again, similar projects here: canal lining, piping, municipal metering, irrigation flow measurements, SCADA. Again, a 50% non-federal cost share is required. And since this is a smaller scale project, it's for up to $100,000 for a 2-year project, and the maximum total project costs of all funding combined must be $225,000 or less. And then our environmental water resources projects. This is one that I had mentioned that our previous cooperative watershed management phase 2 was rolled into, and it also kind of incorporates elements of some of our other grants, such as the drought resiliency projects and the water energy efficiency projects, though for any of those, the focus is on environmental benefits. So that is that is the main difference there between some of those other funding opportunities, even though the project types might be similar. So again, the objective is to support projects focused on environmental benefits and projects that were developed as part of a collaborative process to help carry out an established strategy or plan to increase the reliability of water resources. And so there is a variety of different types of projects that can be funded through this. So watershed management or restoration projects that benefit wildlife species, habitats, riparian areas, or ecosystems directly influenced by water resources management. It can also fund water conservation and efficiency projects that result in quantifiable and sustained water savings and benefit for ecological values. And then also water management or infrastructure improvements to mitigate drought-related impacts to ecological values. And so a 25% non-federal cost share to up to a 50% non-federal cost share is required. The amount will depend on meeting certain eligibility criteria, and that would be described in the funding opportunity announcement. And there are two different funding categories for this. One category is for $2 million and one category is for up to $5 million, and those projects must be completed within 3 years. And then lastly, within WaterSmart grants is water marketing strategy grants. These support the development of water marketing strategies that help prevent conflicts and establish or expand water markets or water marketing activities between willing participants. And so activities that can be funded through this are outreach and partnership building, scoping and planning, the development of a water marketing strategy document, and pilot activities to further the development of a water marketing strategy. A 50% non-federal cost share is required, and there's two different funding categories, one for up to $200,000 for a project that can be completed within 2 years, and up to $400,000 for a 3-year project. And then lastly is our Title 16 program and desalination projects. These are two separate things, but kind of a little bit related, so put them together. So there's different activities within this. The Title 16 congressionally authorized water reclamation and reuse projects, the Title 16 WIN Act water reclamation and reuse projects, and WIN stands for Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act. Desalination construction projects under the WIN Act, and then a new opportunity that will be coming most likely next year, I believe, is our large-scale water recycling. So more to come on that once that opportunity is fully developed and announced. But to talk about some of the others, the Title 16 program and desalination projects are for planning, design, or construction of water reclamation and reuse projects, or of brackish water or ocean desalination projects. And so these projects seek to address water supply challenges by establishing or expanding the use of water reclamation and reuse, improving existing water reuse facilities, or streamlining the implementation of state-of-the-art technology for new facilities. A 75% non-federal cost share is required for this. Also, depending on the program, there is a maximum federal cost share limit of either $20 million or $30 million. And also, to be eligible for this, applicants must submit a feasibility study to reclamation for review. And if that is approved, then you will be eligible to apply for this funding opportunity. And you all have access to this slide. So I've got this slide here with direct links to the different programs if there's one in particular that you'd definitely like to learn more about. All right, and then just some general information. All of our funding announcements for grants are posted on the grants.gov website. I'll speak more about that in a little bit. Also, Reclamation has a WaterSmart website. All of our funding opportunities are also announced there. We are on the WaterSmart website. We also have a WaterSmart dashboard and a data visualization tool. And both of those are excellent ways to learn more about our opportunities, how they've been used in the past, and what they involve. And the data is presented in different ways, through maps, through graphs, through stories. And so it's just a different way to learn rather than just having to read a bunch of documents about a funding opportunity. So I do recommend taking a look at those and seeing if they help you in understanding the different programs and how they can be used. Also, if you'd like to receive updates about our funding opportunities, I highly recommend signing up for our email list. You can do that either by completing a form that's on the WaterSmart website, or you can send an email to watersmart@usbr.gov and request to be added. And then just a heads up that we expect notice of funding opportunities, or NOFOs as we call them, to open soon for our water conservation field service program. Again, we in Arizona are focused on the Lower Colorado Basin region water conservation field service program. So if you were to look in grants.gov right now, you'll see a couple listed, but those are for other regions. We expect the one for our region to be posted most likely the week of September 19th, so very soon. The environmental water resources projects, we expect to tentatively open this fall, and the water marketing strategy grants, we expect that NOFO to open perhaps in January. And this is a graphic to just help in understanding the proposal selection process and then implementation of our project. It can be very lengthy, unfortunately, but just want to make sure everyone understands that up front. Our notices of funding opportunity is where things begin. Those generally stay open for 60 to 90 days. And after those close, it goes into what will be the review phase, which can last for several weeks. The proposals will be reviewed by an application review committee, or ARC, and they'll rank the proposals. And the proposals are also reviewed by our offices and management for final selection. And then selections will be announced in a press release, and applicants are notified whether they were successful or unsuccessful. And then selected applicants will enter a pre-award phase, which also can last for several weeks. During this time, the recipient will provide detailed budget information on business practices, and a final scope of work. Basically, a lot of paperwork involved at this step. And then once that is completed, Reclamation will award the funding. During this time, environmental compliance can also begin, which also can take several months, and I'll talk a little bit more about that next. And then the project implementation, again, most of our grants are for projects that can be completed within 2 or 3 years. The recipient will submit annual performance and financial reports, and also a final reports once the project is completed. And so from the time that a funding opportunity is posted to when an award is actually funded is generally about a year. So it can take some time, so keep that in mind, that definitely need to plan ahead and think out into the future as to when a project can be implemented. If you need something to start quite soon, this might not be the best funding source for you, as it will generally take at least a year, if not perhaps more, for funding to be awarded after an opportunity closes. All right, so a few notes on environmental cultural resources compliance. So all projects must comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, as well as other federal environmental and cultural resource laws. And we don't expect that you are experts on this, so we recommend that you contact your local reclamation office if you are seeking to apply for a grant, just to have a better understanding of what the potential compliance requirements will be and the associated time and costs related to that. Reclamation does assist with covering some or all environmental compliance costs, depending on the amount. And also the environmental compliance activities are completed at local reclamation offices. Basically the final kind of go ahead on a project. All compliance must occur and be completed before any ground disturbance can take place, and this even includes installation of meters and similar devices. And the environmental compliance process typically takes 3 to 12 months, depending on the type of project and the level, perhaps, of ground disturbance that it involves in the area. All right, and so now I'm going to go into some overall tips if you're thinking of applying for a grant. So about grants.gov, again, I mentioned that all of our funding opportunities are announced there, as well as grants from other federal agencies. It's not just specific to reclamation. So definitely take a look at it if you have not before to see what's available. The website also has tutorial videos on how to use grants.gov, as well as other systems such as SAM.gov that are related to it. You will need to register with grants.gov and SAM.gov to submit an application, and do this well in advance, just to make sure there are no delays. Some of that can take a little while to get processed. And the System for Award Management, or SAM, registration must be renewed annually. So if you've registered in the past, do make sure that the registration remains current. Once you are on grants.gov, you can use the search function to find opportunities that reclamation itself offers, or you can search for different federal agencies if you're interested in seeing what others are offering. You can also search for a specific funding opportunity by using a funding opportunity number. If you see an announcement, maybe press release, and a number is referenced there, you can search by that specific number. And then once you do find that funding opportunity, this is a screenshot here of what it kind of looks like on the screen. Click on the tab that's labeled Related Documents, and then there's a line there with a file called Full Announcement, and you will need to download that to have access to the full opportunity announcement with all the instructions and guidance on how to actually apply for the grants. All right, and then once you read that full announcement, you'll notice that a large portion of that document is related to evaluation criteria. This is basically the meat of what a proposal should include. So thoroughly read and follow the instructions in the funding opportunity announcement. If you ever have questions about it, you can contact me or contact the program coordinator that will be listed towards the bottom of the funding opportunity announcement document. Also, give yourself plenty of time to write and submit the proposal. We don't provide templates, which I know some people find frustrating, but to help you along, a recommendation is to copy and paste the evaluation criteria from the funding opportunity into your own document and then use that as a template. And so focus closely on the evaluation criteria questions, answer all multi-part questions that apply to your project, and then there's an application checklist included in that announcement. Use that also to make sure you submit all of the different required documents and submit them on time. And also thoroughly explain and provide support for your answers. The application review committee can only use information provided in an application to make their decisions about each application. And then also don't assume that an application review committee is going to be familiar with your entity or even the area and the issues that even that we're experiencing here in Arizona. The committee is made up of staff from all around reclamation, so there could be folks from Washington, folks from Nebraska, and they have their own things on their minds in their area, and what's happening here might not be common knowledge to them. So definitely want to explain your situation, who your entity is, what your issues are, what you're hoping to accomplish, so that it's fully understood by anyone who's reading that application. And then also just a tip that after we announce funding opportunities in grants.gov, Reclamation usually hosts an informational webinar about that specific funding opportunity. And those are always very helpful just to give you more information about it. And there's also an opportunity to ask questions right then and there to the program coordinators. And if you can't watch it live, they're always posted to be able to watch the recording, so you can still learn from it even if you can't see it as it happens. And then part of the application will be a project budget, which I know can also be a bit complicated to prepare. Do note that cost share, your portion of cost share must be non-federal funding. It doesn't necessarily all have to come from your entity, but it does need to all be non-federal funding. State funding can apply, such as those we learned about earlier, as long as they're loans. I do not believe the grants provided by the state apply. It really just depends on if the source of that funding that the state is providing is federal funding, such as funding from the EPA, because then that technically would be federal funds. And that is also why I have this caveat here that there must be no loan forgiveness, because the loan forgiveness would be considered federal funding. So I know that's complicated, but again, if you have questions, you can reach out to us to ask if the source of funding that you're seeking would be qualifying as your cost share. Note that project costs are reimbursed. They're not provided as a lump sum grant. The budget must represent all project costs, including those that will be paid with federal or non-federal funds. We basically don't distinguish what's going to be paid with each source of funds. The project costs are basically just the project cost total, and we need to see all of that in your budget. The reviewers will use the budget to confirm their understanding of the project itself and the intended benefits. So it is very important, not just for understanding the funding that you need, but also how you're going to use that funding and for what purposes. And if you have any questions as you're developing your budget, you can send an email to this address here on the screen for assistance from our financial assistance office to help you understand that. And then some additional considerations. We highly recommend, if you have the time available, to submit your applications a few days before the deadline. This is just to help you not be in a frantic state come the day of the deadline. If there's any last minute glitches, either on your end or with the grants.gov system, in general, late submissions are not accepted. I also want to note that most of the deadlines are in Denver time zone at 4 p.m. So do remember that while the rest of the country is in daylight savings, we're an hour behind them. So that would be 3 o'clock our time. There have been a few circumstances where entities were cutting it really close because they didn't quite realize that it was 3 o'clock our time, not 4 o'clock. You are able to apply for multiple grants. If a project is selected for multiple awards, if I'm meaning the same project, maybe you tried it 2 different funding categories, or you tried in 2 different grant types. If for some reason that same project is selected for multiple awards, we would just award the one opportunity that provides the most benefit. Do note that most programs have funding limits. For example, the Water Conservation Field Service Program, an entity can only receive up to $100,000 in 1 year, but you could potentially apply for 2 different grants within that, one for maybe $20,000 and another for $90,000, and you're still under that $100,000 limit total. And then there is a $5 million cap for applicants to receive federal funding through fiscal year 2023 funding opportunities for the water and energy efficiency grants, the drought resiliency projects, and the environmental water resources projects. So if an entity were to apply for all 3 of those types, they could not receive more than $5 million total among the 3. So that's just a note for anyone who might be interested in all three of those funding opportunities. If you have a large project that might take longer than 3 years or is more costly than our funding would help you with, you could consider breaking it into phases and applying for funding in different years. And if you do apply for a grant and it's not awarded, Reclamation offers a debriefing, which I think is not generally something that happens with other entities. So I do highly recommend taking advantage of that to just help you understand maybe where the application wasn't as strong, and this will help you in preparing a stronger proposal next time. All right, and then just a few slides on a couple other funding opportunities that we have outside of WaterSmart. One is the Small Storage Program. This is a new program that came about, I believe, because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we expect the notice of funding opportunity for this to open sometime this month. And it's a new grant program for small water storage and groundwater storage projects. And by small, it means a capacity of 2,000 to 30,000 acre feet. The purpose is to increase surface or groundwater storage or to convey water directly or indirectly to or from surface water or groundwater storage. And note for this that to be eligible to apply, you must have completed a feasibility study and submitted it to Reclamation for review. There are specific requirements for the feasibility study, and you can learn more about that on the Small Storage Program website. The submission deadline for the feasibility studies for this year will be in October. Up to $30 million in federal funding can be awarded, or up to 25% of project costs. And again, to learn more about this, visit the Small Water Storage Program website. They also have a separate mailing list. Again, since this is not part of WaterSmart, it has its own mailing list. You can look at the website to apply, and the program coordinator's name is Carrie Durrell, who you can contact if you'd like to learn more. And then we have our desalination and water purification research program. This is managed by our Research and Development Office. And so the objective of this is to have research sponsors partner with Reclamation to develop innovative, cost-effective, and efficient ways to desalinate or treat water. So again, this is focused on research. So projects are laboratory and pilot scale testing projects. And there's two different funding categories, up to $200,000 for an 18-month project or $800,000 for a 2-year project. And generally a 50% cost share, although there may be none required for universities or private entities. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can visit its website, and you could also contact the program coordinator, Juliana Porras Mendoza. And then we have a Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Program. This is managed by Reclamation's Native American and International Affairs Office. And so in this one, Reclamation partners with or assists tribes to develop, manage, and protect their water and related resources. So some examples of what can be funded are technical training, water needs or water quality assessments, and water management or measurement studies. Up to $200,000 can be awarded for projects that can be completed within 2 years, and there's no cost share required. And if you'd like to learn more about this, I've got the website link here. And in the Phoenix area office, our program manager is Lawrence Marquez. And then just lastly, I briefly mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law. I do know it was mentioned earlier during the WIFA presentation. So yes, Reclamation also received a lot of funding through this, and also some new programs were created through it as well. So just want to make sure you're aware that we do have a website on Reclamation's website that is related to the bipartisan infrastructure law itself, just to provide updates on what's being done with that funding, what new programs are being created. There also are periodic information sessions specific to tribes and to stakeholders. Recordings of the previous sessions are available on the website. New sessions will be announced there. You can also join an email list to learn about new sessions or new information related to bipartisan infrastructure law funding. And so some of the other programs and funding opportunities that may be of interest to you are the aging infrastructure and stream maintenance, dam safety, the rural water program, and the aquatic ecosystem restoration program. That is a new program that I believe will fall under WaterSmart and perhaps will open for the first time this coming winter. So I know I went over a lot of information. It's a lot to cover, but I just want to make sure all of you are aware of what we have available. You can definitely reach out to me if anything is of interest to you, if you'd like to learn more, in addition to checking out the links that I provided within the slides. But that's all, and hopefully we have time for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a lot of information. I do have some questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, are all these funding opportunities available to other regions or only Region 8? I think maybe they meant Region 9.
Yeah,
basically, is this funding, oh, sorry, I'm just going to read the rest of that. Is this
go
funding
ahead, sorry,
available
go ahead.
for qualified systems outside of Arizona? Example, California.
Yeah, so everything except for the Water Conservation Field Service Program is open to all. So the Western United States, the Hawaii, Alaska, U.S. territories. It's just the Water Conservation Field Service Program that has a regional focus. And so, yes, for us, that is Lower Colorado Basin, Region 8, which includes almost all of Arizona, and then a small portion of Southern Nevada and Southern California.
Okay, perfect. And then, is there a minimum project cost for any of the WaterSmart categories?
No, I do not believe there's a minimum cost. As I said, some have a maximum amount that a project can be, but as far as I can recollect, there's no minimum cost.
Okay, perfect. And then another question, I did not see political subdivisions for eligible applicants. Are counties eligible for grants?
If the county has water or power delivery authority, then yes, I believe it will be eligible. If you're not certain, then definitely do reach out and I can confirm that so that you know whether or not your entity is eligible.
All right, that sounds good. I think that those are the only questions that we have. Thank you, Lisa, for all the great information.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Again, thanks everybody for staying with us, and thanks to the earlier presenters. My name is Linda Taunt. I'm one of the technical assistance coordinators as well as the capacity development coordinator in drinking water at DEQ. And what we want to do in this last half hour is just give you some options for additional funding opportunities as well as resources. Not going to go into the same level of detail, but just to kind of let you know what's out there. So you can see, we heard this morning from WIFA, USDA, and the Bureau of Reclamation, but from this slide, you can see there's a lot of other funding opportunities out there as well as technical assistance. Again, not going to go into as much detail, but which of these is most appropriate for you goes back to some of the earlier questions we have. For example, what kind of corporate structure are you? Are you a political subdivision, a city, town, special district? Or are you a private water or wastewater system that might be ACC regulated? Are you in a rural versus an urban area? What is the population served? And then are you some sort of special designation? Are you a colonia? Do you have perhaps a lower median household income than the surrounding community? Are you a tribe? All of those things factor into what's the most beneficial avenue for you to go down. excuse me, because we have so many funding opportunities, we put together this funding matrix. Really, it was put together for internal use, but we do have it available on our website. It's fairly detailed, and it's probably a little bit hard to read, so I'm just going to kind of go across the page so you can kind of see what's here. On the very left-hand column, we have whatever organization or entity has the funding or the technical assistance. The next column over is the type of support. Is it a grant? Is it a loan? Is it technical assistance? Then there's a couple of columns about what stage of the project is it? Is it for pre-development? Is it for design? Is it for actual construction? Is it just planning? There is very little funding out there for ongoing O&M. The blue columns are what media is it? Is it drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, or renewable energy? And then the next kind of peachy colored columns are, again, back to what are you? Are you a political subdivision, city, town? Are you a private for-profit? Are you a state, federal, maybe a public school? The types of fundings available is just, different based on what you are. Are you a tribe? And then in the far right column, there are a couple of funding opportunities for unregulated public water systems for private water well situations that I'll just touch on briefly. The two busy columns outline the uses and purposes of that funding. The next column is the eligibility requirements. And then in the far right column, we try and give you either a website or a contact for those programs. This link is available from our technical assistance page or at the URL there in red. So while we're talking about technical assistance, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to plug the technical assistance program at DEQ. We heard from the other funders that there is technical assistance through their programs. At DEQ, this is a snapshot of our web page. And you can see the URL again to the TA page is there at the bottom. And then the funding matrix resource, the funding resource matrix is circled there in red. So you can get to it either from that previous URL or from here. A little bit about our TA program, who's eligible for it. Basically, kind of like I believe WIFA mentioned, it's community and nonprofit, non-transient, non-community water systems serving less than 10,000. However, if you are a transient system, we do have a limited source of funding to help transient systems. So if you have an issue or a concern or a need, feel free to reach out to us. Sorry, I didn't mention that on the previous slide. At the top right, there's the contact information for Chelsea, Rochette, and myself, the three TA providers, our coordinators. How does our TA program work? It's provided through a handful of third-party contractors we have on retainer, or it may be through DEQ staff, either one of us TA providers or maybe our engineering review staff. Every year in the spring, DEQ develops what's called the Master Priority List, which is a ranking of all the public water systems based on a number of factors. How long they've been in existence, do they have a certified operator, do they have MCL issues, are they groundwater versus surface water, just different things. And at the end of the day, there's a score, and basically what we try and do is work down that list, offering technical assistance to those that have the most points, because that would suggest that they have the most need. I will say if a water system has a public health issue, an MCL issue, we do make those first and foremost our priorities to try and help those systems get into compliance as quickly as possible. Our TA program doesn't cost anything. The services we provide are free. However, the solution, the implementation of the solution may result in needs for funding, which is exactly why we're talking about that here today. And from the very beginning, when we start working with the water system, we try and identify what path makes the most sense for you to go down. Again, based on who you are, what you are, where you are. This is just an example of the types of TA that we can provide through DEQ. We've helped prepare preliminary engineering reports, PERs, so that you can go to USDA or NADBank or other federal programs. We do treatment options. Let's say you have arsenic. There's 3, 4, maybe 5 different ways that you can address arsenic. So we can put together an options report. Ultimately, it's up to the water system to make the decision what path to go down, but we can give you an idea about technology, costs, things like that. We can help with permitting, ATCs and AOCs, which includes the design report. If you have an idea of a project, but you have no idea how much it's going to cost, particularly given today's crazy times, we can help you prepare an opinion of probable cost that then you could take forward to some of the other funding agencies. Last year, we kicked off an asset management planning program where we help small systems inventory their assets, look at their condition, figure out when they need to be replaced, how much that's going to cost to replace, and then kind of develop a short-term and a long-term funding strategy so that, next June when that pump goes out, that you've got money in the bank to replace it and it's not an emergency. And lastly, training. Trainings like this, we do operator certification training, management track training. So these are the types of things that DEQ can help you get in compliance or get a plan to come in compliance. So there's just a couple of other funding options that I wanted to just mention. The first one is the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is through the Department of Housing. They get their monies from the Federal Housing and Urban Development, but they provide funds to cities, towns, counties in the non-metro councils of governments. You probably heard the word COG. The map I have there circles the non-metro COGs in northern Arizona. The river counties are western Arizona. Pinal and Gila are central Arizona, and then southeastern Arizona. CDBG basically does public projects to ensure revitalization of a community. So water, wastewater, ADA accommodations, all those types of things are very typical projects for CDBG. The councils of governments provide a lot of technical assistance to applicants, so I would encourage you to reach out to them. CDBG has a couple of different programs. They have regional grants and state special projects, which are applied for through the COGS. And then they have a Colonia set-aside that is directly applied through Department of Housing. If you happen to be in Maricopa, Pima, or unincorporated Pinal County or a tribe, they go directly to the federal U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It gets a little complicated. There's cities and towns, say in Pinal, that are in and are out, but basically contact housing and they can help you. The next one I just wanted to touch on, and I think we heard a little bit about NADBank this morning. North American Development Bank is a binational financial institution that helps communities on both sides of the border. On the Arizona side, it's 63 miles or 100 kilometers. On the Mexican side, I think it's a little bit further. They have both technical assistance and financial assistance, and their programs kind of work in concert. So their technical assistance, or TAP, works with their community assistance, CAP. So the TA side wants to ensure that the project is sustainable through planning, design, and entity capacity building. And then the CAP program is geared towards low-income communities with public sponsors. Their PDAP program, the Project Development Assistance Program, works in concert with the Border Environment Infrastructure Fund, or BEEF. And those are municipal water and wastewater projects that have been prioritized by EPA. They're high priority municipal projects for EPA funding. And all of this is on the funding matrix as far as contacts. The next one is the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, RCAC. That's actually the western arm of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, that you hear in the Midwest and the East. They're a nonprofit organization that provides training, technical assistance, and funding. They're available to public entities, nonprofits, and tribes in rural areas serving less than 50,000. RCAC does a lot of support work with USDA, trying to get entities through the RD Apply and getting ready for USDA funding. They also have a number of programs. They have circuit riders similar to the Rural Water Association that goes out and provides technical assistance to both water and wastewater systems and tribal systems. And then they have an environmental infrastructure loan. Jeff Hayes this morning talked about bridge loans. RCAC used to be the primary source of bridge loans. Now they've expanded to include, I think you said the American Communities Association, or there's a number of different bridge loans now. There's also a small business loan, community facilities, and then RCAC is one of the entities that has some programs for non-public water systems. So it's like household water well systems or shared well situations where they have a loan program to reconstruct, refurbish, and replace individual water wells. They also have a well assessment program that they kind of rotate amongst the Western states, where they'll come into the state and actually do a full assessment of the infrastructure in your well, so that you know how to protect the wellhead and what condition is your casing in, things like that, to help you keep it in good working condition. A couple of other funding opportunities. First one is CoBank, which is a national cooperative bank out of Colorado that specializes in municipal, investor-owned, and not-for-profits. They too are a bridge funding for USDA and others. They have a loan program. They have a refinance program where they can refinance RD loans, although the interest rates are so low, I'm not sure. And then they have this Rural Infrastructure Opportunity Fund, which is to try and get private sector dollars to complement some of the existing programs to create jobs in rural communities by upgrading these facilities, water, wastewater, roads, dams, bridges, things like that. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on National Rural Water, which is the umbrella organization for all of the state's rural water associations like ours. They do have funding, well, they have assistance and funding available to municipalities, counties, special districts, tribes, and nonprofits. They do have an emergency loan fund, which is a 90-day no-interest loan up to $100,000 for disaster recovery or other imminent threat. I don't personally know anyone who's gone through that, but I know it's available, and I've had Rural Water, sort of check with headquarters on this on a couple of different occasions, so it's something to be aware of. And then another way to seek assistance, if you don't want to onesie-twosie reach out to the various entities, is you can come and present to what we call the Rural Water Infrastructure Committee, or the RIC. This is a partnership of all of the technical assistance providers and the funding agencies, including all the ones you've heard about today. We get together quarterly. Since the pandemic, it's been virtual, but we used to meet in person and we could actually go on the road. We listen to requests for funding from, again, small water systems, wastewater systems, and other opportunities. Some of them have just been business opportunities. Again, we get together quarterly. This is a brand new website, so not all of the buttons are working yet, but we do have a project information form that we ask you to fill out and send back in to get on the agenda. And then that's just basic information about who you are, what you're asking for. And then because we're virtual, we ask you at the day of the committee to maybe have 3, 4, 5 slides to kind of better explain who you are, where you are, what you're asking for, what the issues are. Pictures do a lot to help. We try and send all this information out to the partners about a week ahead of time so they can come in prepared to talk to you about what they might be able to offer. And the website for the RIC is there. And these are links to the kind of the key resources that I've mentioned. Again, the funding matrix has all of those resources, although I do need to update it for a number of the presentations we had today for the bill funding. And with that, that's all I had, but we're open to questions.
Thank you, Linda. That was a lot of good information. We do have one question. To be clear, is a community for-profit water system eligible for technical assistance?
A community water system would be a
Community for-profit.
NTNC. Correct. I'm not sure what that would be, but it is a community water system, so it would be eligible. An NTNC for-profit would not be.
Correct. So it has to be a nonprofit NTNC. Correct.
But if it's a community, some water systems are oddly community systems. As long as they're community, they would be eligible.
Okay. We have another question from Robert. So he says, I own a small water system in rural Arizona. I'm in need of a new well. Our water table is dropping 6 feet per year. A new well will cost $60,000 to $90,000. My system supplies water for less than 200 people. Is there something I can qualify for, a loan or a grant?
Well, you heard a number of the funding opportunities this morning, as well as the funding matrix, as far as designing and the permitting of the well. Our technical assistance program, as well as probably WIFAs and others, could probably help you. So there certainly are resources out there.
Correct. And then Robert can reach out to us as well if you want to take down Linda's information or my information. They can reach out. Yeah. I have a couple of other questions. What about NTNC for-profit that is not competitive?
Or not what?
I think it's competitive.
Not knowing what that is, I would suggest the person just reach out to us and we can discuss it. Generally speaking, the SRF funding is, as Lindsay mentioned, is for communities and nonprofit NTNCs. But as I mentioned, we do have a limited budget for other type water systems, be they transient or whatever. So yeah, just reach out to us and we can discuss it.
Okay, that sounds good. And then another question. We have a project that is shovel ready. We did not have enough ARPA funds to finish. It's a water service replacement for 34 homes. We're Colonia Town. Would we qualify for a grant?
I think from this morning's funders with WIFA, you'd probably, as a Colonia, would be eligible for forgivable principal, how much they'd have to figure out. And again, from USDA, they do have grants available, although their process is a little bit more lengthy. But again, you can reach out to any of us that have talked today, and we can try and figure out the best path for you to pursue.
That sounds good, yeah, especially because it's a Colonia. Other than that, we have one more question about, can we request wastewater grade 4 treatment training? Dipti, I'll pass that question to our operator certification program. I believe they're considering that, so I'll pass that question to them and let you know what their response is. Let me see if we have any other questions. Yeah, I believe that is all for the questions. Linda, appreciate your presentation. A lot of good information. Let me see if anything got added. Oh, okay. I think a couple of questions got added. So, so the first question, the city I represent is currently right under 50,000, and we just bought out the water company and are realizing that the system needs major upgrades and infrastructural improvements. With the money coming in from bills, how do cities tap into these grants and not forgivable loans? And I believe we have WIFA on the line and USB are still on the line too, if anybody wants to.
Sure, maybe WIFA wants to take a stab at that.
Yeah, so this is Lindsay from WIFA. So was the last part, how'd you take advantage of grants and not forgivable loan?
Right. It's, with the money coming in from bill, how do the cities tap into the grants and not forgivable loans?
So Yes, I mean with WIFAs, the bill funds that we're getting that are flowing through our SRF programs, we are giving those out as loans, and they'll have a significant portion of loan forgiveness. So we don't do grants out of the state revolving fund programs where we're getting the bill funds. We do have some other, new grant options that I mentioned earlier, possibly Water Supply Development Fund, could have uh, a good option for looking for grant funds. That's the state funding program. So.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. We do have another question. Oh, never mind. It's a comment just saying it's been a very comprehensive overview of the funding options. So thank you to all the presenters. And then another question is, do you know how long until the presentation recording will be posted? Rita, just depends on our communications team. So usually a couple of weeks, and then it will be posted. I did put in the chat where the location will be posted, but it's on our regular operator certification page. There's a page with all the presentations and recordings, PowerPoint handouts, and so on. So that's where you can find it. I can show you also on our website where you can find that. Let me check if there are any other questions for our presenters first.
Rasheth, there was a question, and maybe I missed it, but it says, I do not see political subdivisions for eligible. Are counties eligible for grants? Was that addressed? I just don't remember.
It was, but if you want to reiterate or if you want to answer it again, that's okay as well.
No, I think I would probably kick that to WIFA again. I just wasn't sure if that.
Yeah, Lindsay did answer it earlier.
Okay.
But okay. If you want to read it to her again, she can just quickly reiterate the answer.
I do not see political subdivisions for eligible applicants. Are counties eligible for grants? And I don't know if that's water or wastewater.
And I think this might have been a question that went to Lisa with USBR, but this is Lindsay from WIFA, and I think it's pretty much kind of the same thing that Lisa said is counties could be eligible for WIFA funding if they own and operate the public water system or the publicly owned treatment work. I think in Arizona, we only have one, and I always get it confused if it's Pima or Pinal County that actually owns and operates the treatment facility there. But so it's the same thing with the other funding sources. Counties could be eligible as long as they own or operate the systems. Also, if they are managing stormwater, counties could be eligible. So doing any sort of non-point source pollution prevention.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. I think that, no, we have a couple more questions. We need help writing the funding request submittals. Is there assistance available for the request preparations?
This is Linda with DEQ. Yes, through our technical assistance program, we certainly have contractors that could help with that. And I believe, Lindsay, I think you probably do as well.
Sorry, for assistance with filling out applications?
Preparing, the packages.
Yeah. I mean, we WIFA staff will help, preparing any applications to the WIFA programs. That is one nice part about not being a grant program is we can help you through all the questions, help you answer. It's not going to be a competitive process, so we're always happy to sit down and help with that.
And again, depending on what pieces of paperwork you're trying to fill out, we can help with funding applications. But again, those like PERs and environmental reports that the agencies sometimes need, we can help with all of that.
Perfect. Thanks for mentioning that again, Linda. I don't think we have any more questions, but I wanted to go over a couple of things before we close the webinar here. Let me show my screen. Okay. All right, so before I go into just some final items, I wanted to show you where the webinar is going to be posted. So, all right, now you can see, Linda, can you confirm you can see our website, right, and the operator certification webpage?
Yes.
Okay. So basically how you get to that webpage is if you just go to azdq.gov, you go to programs, under water quality programs, you would go to operator certification, and that's our operator certification page. So under that, if you scroll down and go under workshops on the right-hand side, there's workshop presentations. So if you click on that, it will take you to all the presentations that have been uploaded on our website. You can, you know, if it has a video, if it's been recorded and it has a video, it'll let you know to watch the video. If not, if it's just a presentation like a PDF format or PowerPoint format, it'll just tell you to view the presentation. So this is where we'll be posting it. It's going to be under technical assistance presentation. So this is where you can go back and view the presentation. So now that I went over that, I just want to close. Thank you for all the presenters. Lindsay Jones from WIFA, Jeff Hayes from USDA, Lisa Rivera from USBR, and Linda from ADEQ. Thank you very much. That was a lot of good information and a lot of great questions. So thank you everyone for staying engaged and asking a lot of questions. Again, keep the agenda as your PDH tracking document. You can download the agenda and the PDF handouts, all the presentation handouts in the handout section on the right hand side. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that so you don't miss that. If you have any issues downloading it or have any questions regarding the webinar or the presenters, you can email me directly. I have my information up on the screen, so it's rg10@azdq.gov, or you can call me as well. I have our technical assistance program web page posted there if you want to take a picture. Again, you can reach out to Linda, myself, if you have any questions regarding technical assistance or funding. We would love to hear your feedback, and then if you have any suggestions on future topics, please feel free to let us know as well. You can submit your feedback at azdq.gov/feedback, or you can email us directly as well. And with that, thank you everyone for staying very engaged, and thank you all the presenters, and we'll end the webinar here. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.